Hey there, welcome to Cozy Bedtime True Crime Stories. Tonight, we're diving into 3 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. The spring air in Houston, Texas, carried a deceptive warmth on April 25, 2021, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the suburban sprawl of spring. The neighborhood, a patchwork of tidy lawns and modern homes, buzzed with the quiet hum of evening routines. Families settling in for dinner, children playing in driveways, and the occasional dog barking in the distance. At one house on Pine Green Lane, however, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. A party was in full swing, the kind where music pulsed through open windows and laughter spilled into the night. Taylor Pomaski, a vibrant 29-year-old with a smile that could light up a room, was at the heart of it all, her presence magnetic as she moved through the crowd. To those who saw her that night, she seemed like any other young woman enjoying a moment of carefree revelry. No one could have known that by morning, Taylor would vanish, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt her family, confound investigators, and unravel a web of secrets that stretched far beyond that single night. Taylor was no stranger to the complexities of life. Born in 1992, she had grown up in a world that demanded resilience. Her parents, Stephen and Jane Pomaski, had raised her in a modest Houston home, where love was abundant but resources were sometimes scarce. Taylor, with her chestnut hair and bright, inquisitive eyes, had always been a dreamer. As a child, she'd spend hours sketching designs for imaginary fashion lines or choreographing dances in her backyard, her laughter echoing through the neighborhood. She was the kind of person who made friends effortlessly, her warmth drawing people in like moths to a flame. But as she grew older, Taylor's life took unexpected turns. By her late 20s, she was navigating a relationship with Kevin Ware Jr., a former NFL player whose charm masked a darker side. Their bond, tumultuous and intense, would become a focal point in the story of her disappearance, a thread that investigators would tug at until the truth began to unravel. That April evening, the party at Taylor's home was a mix of familiar faces and strangers, a gathering fueled by alcohol and the promise of a good time. The house, a modern two-story with a neatly trimmed lawn, was alive with energy. Neighbors later recalled hearing the thump of bass and the clink of glasses, the sounds of celebration that seemed unremarkable at the time. Taylor, dressed in a casual but stylish outfit, jeans and a flowy blouse, moved through the crowd with ease, her laughter cutting through the noise. She was in her element, hosting friends and acquaintances, her home a temporary haven for revelry. Kevin Ware was there too, his presence imposing yet charismatic, a former athlete whose career had faded, but whose aura still commanded attention. To outsiders, they seemed like a couple caught in the orbit of a lively night, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. As the clock ticked past midnight, the party began to wind down. Guests drifted away, leaving behind empty bottles and the faint smell of cigarette smoke. By the early hours of April 26th, the house was quiet, its energy spent. What happened in those final moments, when the last guest left and the door closed, remains a mystery shrouded in speculation. Taylor was last seen at that party, her final moments captured only in the hazy memories of those who were there. No one reported seeing her leave, no one heard a scream, and no one noticed anything overtly sinister. Yet, by the time the sun rose, Taylor Pomaski was gone. Her absence wasn't immediately noticed. In the days that followed, life in spring continued its steady rhythm. But for Stephen and Jane Pomaski, a creeping unease began to take hold. Taylor was close to her parents, particularly her mother, with whom she spoke regularly. When Mother's Day arrived on May 9th, and Taylor's phone went unanswered. Jane's worry turned to dread. It wasn't like her, Jane later told reporters, her voice trembling with the weight of hindsight. She'd always call, always check in. When we didn't hear from her, we knew something was wrong. By May 10th, the Pomaskis could wait no longer. They contacted the Harris County Sheriff's Office, filing a missing persons report just after midnight. The wheels of an investigation began to turn, but the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, dead ends, and chilling discoveries. The Harris County Sheriff's Office, led by seasoned investigators accustomed to the complexities of missing persons cases, took Taylor's disappearance seriously from the start. The initial report painted a picture of a young woman who had simply vanished, leaving no trace. Her phone, her purse, her car, all remained at the house on Pine Green Lane. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no obvious clues to suggest foul play. Yet, the circumstances were suspicious. Taylor wasn't the type to walk away without a word, abandoning her life and her loved ones. The investigators turned their attention to the last place she was seen, her home, and the party that had unfolded there. Detective Sarah Thompson, a veteran with a sharp mind and a knack for piecing together puzzles, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the Pine Green Lane residence on May 11th, her notepad in hand and her eyes scanning the scene for anything out of place. The house was unremarkable from the outside, its beige exterior blending seamlessly with the suburban landscape. Inside, however, the remnants of the party told a story of chaos barely contained. Empty beer cans littered the countertops, and the air still carried the faint scent of stale alcohol. Thompson's team combed through the house, collecting fingerprints, photographing the scene, and interviewing neighbors. They learned that the party had been loud but not unusual, and no one recalled hearing anything suspicious after the guests began to leave. The focus quickly shifted to Kevin Ware Jr. at 40, where was a man whose life had seen both glory and decline. A former tight end for the San Francisco 49ers, he had once been a rising star in the NFL, his athletic prowess earning him a brief moment in the spotlight. But by 2021, his career was a distant memory, replaced by a rap sheet that included drug charges and allegations of violence. Just 5 days before Taylor's disappearance, Ware had been released on a $23,000 bond after an arrest on April 20th for possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver and unlawful possession of a firearm as a felon. His freedom was tenuous, his life a tangle of legal troubles and personal struggles. To investigators, he was an obvious person of interest. When Thompson and her partner, Detective Michael Reyes, brought Ware in for questioning, he was calm, almost too calm. Sitting across from them in a stark interrogation room, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, Ware maintained an air of detachment. "I don't know where she is," he said, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding theirs. "We had a party, people came and went. I saw her that night, but I don't know what happened after." His story was vague, offering little to work with. He admitted to being at the party but claimed he'd left early, leaving Taylor behind with a few lingering guests. When pressed for details, names, times, anything concrete, Ware's answers grew evasive. Thompson's instincts told her he was hiding something, but without evidence, her suspicions were just that. The investigation widened, reaching out to friends, family, and anyone who had been at the party. Taylor's best friend, Emily Carter, painted a picture of a woman who was vibrant but troubled. "She loved Kevin, but it wasn't easy," Emily said, her voice heavy with regret. "He could be charming, but there was another side to him. I told her to leave him, but she thought she could fix things." Emily's words hinted at a relationship marked by volatility, a dynamic that investigators noted with growing interest. Others who attended the party offered conflicting accounts. Some recalled Taylor laughing and dancing, while others mentioned a heated exchange between her and Ware late in the evening. The details were murky, clouded by alcohol and time, but the picture that emerged was one of a night that had spiraled into something darker. Weeks passed with little progress. The media picked up the story, and Taylor's face began appearing on local news channels, her smile frozen in photographs that belied the gravity of her absence. The Pomaskis clung to hope, organizing searches and plastering flyers across Houston. Jane, her face etched with worry, stood before cameras, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. "She's our daughter, our light," she said, her voice breaking. "We just want her home." The community rallied, but the lack of leads was disheartening. Taylor's phone records showed no activity after April 25th, and her social media accounts were silent. It was as if she had been erased from the world. By June, the investigation took a significant turn. During a bond hearing for Ware's earlier drug and firearm charges, prosecutors dropped a bombshell. The defendant is suspected of murdering his girlfriend, Taylor Pomaski. They stated in court documents, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the case. The accusation was stark, but no formal charges had been filed in connection with Taylor's disappearance. Ware's attorney, Kobe Dubose, expressed surprise, telling reporters, "That's the first time we've seen that. It's news to us." The statement was a calculated move by prosecutors, signaling their belief that Ware was involved, but it also highlighted the challenge they faced. Suspicion was one thing, evidence was another. Detective Thompson dug deeper into Ware's background. His criminal history painted a troubling picture. In 2008, he had been convicted of selling cocaine in Mississippi, serving years in prison. After moving to Kentucky, he faced another drug charge in 2014. His relationship with Taylor had been marked by turbulence, with reports of arguments and allegations of controlling behavior. Friends of Taylor's whispered about incidents of verbal abuse, though no formal domestic violence reports had been filed. Thompson and her team began to build a theory. Had an argument at the party escalated into something fatal? Was Ware's calm demeanor a facade hiding a terrible truth? The summer of 2021 brought no answers, only more questions. The Harris County Sheriff's Office conducted searches of the area around Pine Green Lane, scouring wooded areas and nearby waterways for any sign of Taylor. Volunteers joined law enforcement, combing through underbrush and abandoned lots, but the efforts yielded nothing. The case grew colder with each passing day, the initial flurry of media attention fading as other stories took precedence. For the Pomaskis, the silence was unbearable. Stephen, a quiet man who rarely spoke to the press, began to lose sleep, haunted by the thought that his daughter was out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. In December 2021, a breakthrough came, but it was not the one anyone had hoped for. During a search in a remote area of northern Harris County, near the town of Tomball, investigators discovered human remains. The location was a desolate stretch of land, far from the suburban comfort of spring, where thickets of trees and overgrown fields hid secrets from the world. The remains were badly decomposed, making immediate identification impossible, but investigators suspected a connection to Taylor's case. The discovery was kept quiet initially, as forensic teams worked to process the scene. The Pomaskis were notified, their hearts caught in a torturous limbo between hope and despair. The Harris County Medical Examiner's Office took over, conducting meticulous tests to determine the identity of the remains. DNA analysis, dental records, and other forensic tools were employed, a process that stretched into the new year. On April 29, 2022, the results were confirmed. The remains were those of Taylor Pomaski. The announcement was a devastating blow to her family, who had held on to the slim hope that she might still be alive. Jane collapsed in tears, her grief a raw, palpable force. Stephen stood beside her, his face a mask of stoic pain, but his trembling hands betrayed the depth of his loss. The medical examiner's office noted that the cause of death was undetermined due to the condition of the remains, but the circumstances of Taylor's disappearance pointed to foul play. The identification of Taylor's remains reignited the investigation, with renewed focus on Kevin Ware. He remained in custody, not on charges related to Taylor's death, but on the earlier drug and firearm charges, as well as a violation of his bond conditions. Prosecutors argued that Ware's failure to report for bond supervision and his suspected involvement in Taylor's disappearance warranted keeping him behind bars. The Harris County Sheriff's Office, led by Senior Deputy Thomas Gilliland, issued a statement confirming the identification and urging anyone with information to come forward. "We're still investigating," Gilliland said, his voice measured but resolute. "This case is far from closed." Detective Thompson and her team redoubled their efforts, retracing their steps to uncover any missed clues. They revisited the Pine Green Lane house, now empty and silent, its walls holding secrets that refused to speak. They interviewed witnesses again, hoping time might have jogged memories or loosened tongues. One guest from the party, a woman named Rachel, came forward with a new detail. She recalled seeing Ware and Taylor arguing in the kitchen, their voices raised but their words indistinct. Rachel hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was just a lover's quarrel, but in hindsight, she wondered if it was a sign of something more sinister. The information was tantalizing, but not enough to build a case. The investigation also explored the possibility that Ware had helped covering up the crime. His connections in Houston's underworld, forged through years of drug-related activities, raised questions about whether others were involved. Thompson's team tracked down associates of Ware's, but none provided concrete evidence linking him to Taylor's death. The lack of physical evidence, blood, DNA, or a murder weapon, remained a significant hurdle. The house on Pine Green Lane had been cleaned thoroughly in the days after the party, leaving little for forensic teams to work with. The remote location where Taylor's remains were found offered few clues, the elements having erased much of what might have been left behind. As 2022 gave way to 2023, the case remained unresolved, a lingering wound for Taylor's family and a frustration for law enforcement. Ware, still in Montgomery County Jail, continued to maintain his innocence, his attorney arguing that the accusations against him were speculative. "There's no evidence tying my client to any crime related to Ms. Pomaski," Dubose told the press, his tone defiant. But the suspicion surrounding Ware was unshakable, fueled by his criminal history and the timing of Taylor's disappearance. The Pomaskis, meanwhile, grappled with their grief, channeling their pain into advocacy. They established a small foundation in Taylor's name, aimed at supporting families of missing persons, a way to find meaning in their loss. The story of Taylor Pomaski's disappearance is a study in contrasts. The vibrancy of a young woman full of life, extinguished in a moment of unseen violence. The promise of a party that turned into a nightmare. The hope of a family shattered by a truth too painful to bear. For Detective Thompson, the case became a personal mission, a puzzle she refused to abandon. She often visited the site where Taylor's remains were found, standing among the trees and imagining the final moments of a woman she'd never met but felt she knew. The questions lingered. What happened in those final hours at Pine Green Lane? Did Taylor fight for her life, or was she taken by surprise? And what role did Kevin Ware play in the tragedy that unfolded? The case remains open, a file on Thompson's desk that grows thicker with each passing year. The Harris County Sheriff's Office continues to seek answers, offering a tip line through Crime Stoppers for anyone with information. The Pomaskis hold onto their memories of Taylor, her laughter, her dreams, her unyielding spirit, while grappling with the reality that justice may never be served. In spring, the house on Pine Green Lane stands quiet, its windows dark, a silent witness to a night that changed everything. And somewhere, in the spaces between what is known and what is lost, Taylor Pomaski's story endures, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring search for truth. Story 2. The morning of December 16, 2000, broke over Lake Seminole with a brittle gray dawn, the kind that seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself knew something was amiss. The lake, straddling the border between Florida and Georgia, shimmered under a thin veil of mist, its surface glassy and still, reflecting the skeletal outlines of cypress trees. Jerry Michael Williams, known to everyone as Mike, was already out on the water by then, or so his family believed. A 31-year-old real estate appraiser from Tallahassee, Mike was a man of routine, a creature of habit who found solace in the quiet rhythms of duck hunting. He'd told his wife, Denise, he'd be back by noon to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary and take their infant daughter, Ansley, to a Christmas party. But as the hours ticked by and the sun climbed higher, Mike didn't return. His truck, his boat, and his absence would spark a mystery that unraveled a web of deceit, betrayal, and murder, one that would grip a community and haunt those who loved him for nearly 2 decades. Mike grew up in Bradfordville, a rural pocket north of Tallahassee, in a double-wide trailer with his older brother, Nick. Their parents, a Greyhound bus driver and a daycare provider, instilled in their sons a work ethic that carried Mike through high school and into Florida State University, where he met Denise Merrill. She was his high school sweetheart, a bright-eyed girl with a quick laugh and a knack for keeping things organized. Their romance blossomed through college, rooted in shared dreams of a stable, comfortable life. By 2000, they seemed to have it: a modest home, a baby girl, and careers that promised security. Mike as an appraiser, Denise as an accountant. To those who knew them, they were the picture of a young, all-American family. But beneath the surface, currents of discontent were stirring, currents that would pull Mike into oblivion. That December morning, Mike had risen early, kissed Denise goodbye, and driven to Lake Seminole, a sprawling, 37,500-acre reservoir known for its bass fishing and waterfowl. He'd packed his waders, his hunting jacket, and a flashlight, planning to hunt ducks in the pre-dawn quiet. Denise later told police he'd left around 4 a.m., promising to be home by midday. When noon came and went, Denise grew anxious. By late afternoon, she was frantic, calling Mike's brother and their mutual friends, Brian and Kathy Winchester, to ask if they'd heard from him. No one had. By evening, she contacted the authorities and a search began. The Leon County Sheriff's Office launched boats onto Lake Seminole, their engines cutting through the stillness as searchlights swept the water. They found Mike's Ford Bronco parked near a boat ramp, its trailer still hitched, but the scene raised questions. The truck was parked in a muddy, overgrown area, far from the concrete ramp that hunters typically used. It didn't make sense. Mike was meticulous, the kind of man who'd never drag his boat through mud when an easier option was available. Divers scoured the lake, and within days they recovered Mike's boat, floating eerily in the middle of the water. Its engine was off, but the gas tank was full, a detail that puzzled investigators. If Mike had fallen out while motoring, the engine should have kept running until the fuel ran dry. And yet, there it was, silent, with no sign of Mike. Days turned into weeks, and the search grew desperate. Divers found Mike's waders, hunting jacket, and flashlight at the bottom of the lake, tangled in weeds and surrounded by alligator excrement. The discovery fueled a grim theory. Mike had drowned, his body devoured by alligators, a not uncommon fate in Florida's wild waters. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission leaned into this explanation, noting the lake's healthy alligator population. Denise, distraught but composed, accepted the theory, as did Mike's family, though it sat uneasily with his mother, Cheryl, and brother, Nick. Mike was an experienced outdoorsman, a strong swimmer who knew the lake's dangers. Could he really have been so careless? By early 2001, with no body recovered, Denise petitioned the court to declare Mike legally dead. The judge, citing the evidence of the abandoned boat and submerged gear, granted the request. Denise collected $1.75 million from 3 life insurance policies on Mike's life. Policies that, unbeknownst to most, had been written by Brian Winchester, their close friend and an insurance agent. Life moved on, or so it seemed. Denise raised Ansley alone, and in 2005, she married Brian, who had recently divorced Kathy. The two couples had been inseparable in their youth, high school sweethearts who double-dated and shared vacations. Now Denise and Brian built a new life together, raising Ansley in a home that seemed to embody the stability Mike had worked so hard to provide. But the past has a way of clawing its way back, and Mike's disappearance was no ordinary accident. The years that followed were kind to Denise and Brian, at least on the surface. They settled into a comfortable routine, attending church, hosting barbecues, and raising Ansley, who grew into a bright, curious girl with her father's easy smile. But Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, couldn't let go. She haunted the sheriff's office, the Wildlife Commission, anyone who'd listen, insisting that Mike's disappearance was no accident. She wrote letters, made calls, and even placed a billboard near Lake Seminole, pleading for information. "My son did not drown," she'd say, her voice trembling with conviction. "He was too careful, too strong." Her persistence was both a lifeline and a burden, keeping Mike's memory alive but alienating her from Denise, who grew distant, urging Cheryl to move on. Investigators, too, had their doubts. The Cold Case Unit at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, reopened Mike's file in 2004, prompted by Cheryl's relentless advocacy. They re-examined the evidence, and the anomalies began to stack up. The boat's full gas tank, the odd parking spot, the fact that Mike, who rarely hunted alone, had gone to the lake without a companion. And then there was the insurance money, $1.75 million, a staggering sum for a young couple, especially when one of the policies had been written by Brian just months before Mike vanished. The investigators couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but without a body or concrete evidence of foul play, the case languished. Life, meanwhile, was unraveling for Denise and Brian. By 2012, their marriage was fraying, strained by financial pressures and unspoken tensions. Brian, who'd always been charming but volatile, grew increasingly erratic. In August 2016, he snapped. In a chilling act, he kidnapped Denise at gunpoint from her office parking lot, binding her with duct tape and holding her in his car for hours before releasing her. He claimed it was a desperate attempt to reconcile, but Denise, shaken, filed for divorce. Brian was arrested, charged with kidnapping, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The incident blew open the fragile facade of their lives, and it would prove to be the key that unlocked the truth about Mike's disappearance. In 2017, as Brian sat in a prison cell, facing decades behind bars, he made a decision that would change everything. He offered to testify against Denise in exchange for immunity in Mike's case. What he revealed was a story so cold-blooded it seemed ripped from a noir thriller. According to Brian, he and Denise had been having an affair since 1997, sparked at a Sister Hazel concert when their spouses were out of town. Their love, born in secret, grew obsessive, fueled by resentment of their marriages and dreams of a life together. But there was a problem, Mike. Divorce was messy, and neither wanted to lose the stability of their families or the financial security Mike's life represented. So they hatched a plan to kill Mike and stage his death as an accident, ensuring Denise could collect the insurance money and they could be together. Brian's testimony was chilling in its detail. On December 16, 2000, he said, he met Mike at Lake Seminole under the pretense of a hunting trip. As Mike climbed into his boat, Brian shot him with a shotgun, killing him instantly. He then weighed the body down and sank it in a remote part of the lake, planting the waders, jacket, and flashlight to support the alligator theory. The boat was left adrift, its engine off, to suggest an accident. For years, they'd kept their secret, dating others to deflect suspicion before marrying in 2005. The insurance money funded their new life, but guilt and paranoia gnawed at them, especially Brian, who feared the truth would surface. The FDLE, armed with Brian's confession, launched a new search. In October 2017, they found Mike's remains in a secluded area of Lake Seminole, far from the original search site. The discovery confirmed Brian's story. Mike hadn't drowned, he'd been murdered. Forensic analysis revealed a gunshot wound, and the case shifted from a missing persons mystery to a homicide investigation. Denise was arrested in May 2018, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact. The trial that followed would grip Tallahassee, a city unaccustomed to such high-profile scandals. The courtroom in Leon County was a study in contrasts, the polished wood of the judge's bench gleaming under fluorescent lights, the air heavy with the weight of grief and betrayal. Denise sat at the defense table, her face pale but composed, her dark hair pulled back tightly. She was 48 now, no longer the young bride who'd mourned her husband's disappearance, but a woman accused of orchestrating his death. Across the room, Cheryl Williams sat in the gallery, her eyes fixed on her former daughter-in-law, a mix of sorrow and fury etched into her face. She'd waited 17 years for this moment, for the truth to claw its way into the light. The prosecution's case was built on Brian's testimony, a double-edged sword. He was a confessed killer, a convicted kidnapper, and as the defense would argue, a man with every reason to lie. Assistant State Attorney John Fuchs painted a vivid picture of a calculated plot, driven by greed and forbidden love. He described how Denise and Brian, high school sweethearts turned adulterers, had seen Mike as an obstacle to their happiness. The insurance policies, Fuchs argued, were the motive. $1.75 million, enough to start a new life free of financial worry. He showed the jury a document. Denise had filed an insurance claim just 19 days after Mike went missing, a move that raised eyebrows even then. This was no accident, Fuchs said, his voice steady. This was a murder born of betrayal, planned with chilling precision. Brian took the stand, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding Denise's. He recounted the affair, the plan, the murder itself. He described the weight of Mike's body as he dragged it through the mud, the cold water of Lake Seminole swallowing it whole. His voice cracked as he spoke of the years of paranoia, the fear that every knock at the door was the police. I did it for her, he said, glancing at Denise. But it was both of us. We both wanted him gone. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with the horror of his words. Denise's attorney, Philip Padovano, countered with a different narrative. He portrayed Brian as a manipulator, a man who'd acted alone, pinning the blame on Denise to save himself. The only person who says Denise was involved is Brian Winchester, Padovano told the jury, his tone sharp. A confessed killer, a convicted kidnapper, a man who'd say anything to avoid a life sentence. He pointed out inconsistencies in Brian's story, the lack of physical evidence tying Denise to the crime. Denise, he said, was a grieving widow, a mother who'd believed her husband had drowned, manipulated by a man she'd trusted. The defense called no witnesses. Denise did not testify. It was a risky strategy, but Padovano bet on the jury's distrust of Brian. The trial lasted 5 days, each one a slow unraveling of the life Mike had built. Witnesses testified to his character, a devoted father, a loyal friend, a man who'd never have left his daughter willingly. Cheryl took the stand, her voice breaking as she described her son's love for Ansley, his plans for their future. She spoke of the years she'd fought for answers, the nights she'd lain awake, imagining Mike's final moments. He didn't drown, she said, her eyes locked on the jury. He was taken from us. Her testimony was a gut punch, a reminder of the human cost of the crime. On December 11, 2018, after less than a day of deliberations, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. Denise was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 30 years for conspiracy and accessory charges. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs, Cheryl, Nick, and their supporters weeping with relief, while Denise's family sat stunned, their world upended. Denise maintained her composure, her face a mask as she was led away in handcuffs. But the story wasn't over. In 2019, Denise appealed her conviction, arguing that the evidence against her was circumstantial and that Brian's testimony was unreliable. The First District Court of Appeal agreed in part, overturning her first-degree murder conviction in 2020. The court ruled that the prosecution hadn't proven Denise's direct involvement in the killing itself, only her role in the conspiracy and cover-up. Her life sentence was reduced to 30 years, a decision that sparked outrage among Mike's family. Cheryl, now in her 70s, vowed to keep fighting, insisting that Denise was as guilty as Brian. She took my son, she told reporters outside the courthouse, her voice raw. She doesn't get to walk away. For the people of Tallahassee, the case was a wound that refused to heal. It was a story of love twisted into something dark and unrecognizable, of a community betrayed by two of its own. Mike's memory lingered in the places he'd loved, the quiet shores of Lake Seminole, the streets of Bradfordville where he'd played as a boy. Ansley, now a young woman, faced the impossible task of reconciling the mother she'd known with the woman convicted of her father's murder. Cheryl, ever the fighter, continued her advocacy, speaking at victims' rights events, her grief a fuel that never seemed to run dry. The case of Jerry Michael Williams was more than a crime. It was a tragedy that rippled outward, touching everyone who heard it. It was a reminder of how fragile trust can be, how the people we hold closest can harbor the darkest secrets. On Lake Seminole, the water still gleams under the Florida sun, its surface hiding depths that keep their secrets well. But for those who loved Mike, the truth was finally theirs, a truth hard-won, bittersweet, and forever incomplete. Story 3. The evening of August 2nd, 2009, settled over Campbelltown, a quiet rural hamlet in Tasmania's northern Midlands, with the kind of stillness that blankets small communities after dusk. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and wood smoke, as the town's modest homes glowed softly under the streetlights. At 14, High Street, Shane Jeffrey Barker, a 36-year-old mechanic known for his quick laugh and love of motorbikes, was winding down after a long day. His small weatherboard house, cluttered with tools and motorcycle parts, was a haven of familiarity in a life marked by hard work and harder losses. Shane, recently separated from his wife, Rachel Jordan, was trying to rebuild, unaware that the shadows outside his home concealed a deadly intent. Nolene June Jordan, 65, and her husband, Cedric Harper Jordan, 68, driven by a tangled web of family grievances and cold calculation, were about to turn a simmering dispute into a brutal act of violence that would haunt Tasmania for years. Shane Barker was a man of the land, born in 1973 in Launceston, a city an hour's drive north of Campbelltown. Raised in a working-class family, he grew up tinkering with engines, his hands perpetually stained with grease. By his 20s, Shane had become a skilled mechanic, his reputation for fixing anything with an engine earning him steady work at a local garage. He married Rachel Jordan in 2000, a union that brought him into the orbit of her parents, Nolene and Cedric Jordan, a couple from Swansea, a coastal town 2 hours east. The marriage was turbulent, marked by arguments over money and lifestyle, and by 2009, Shane and Rachel had separated, their divorce proceedings ongoing. Shane's life was modest but full. He rode his Harley on weekends, shared beers with mates at the Campbelltown Hotel, and doted on his young daughter, Emily, who lived with Rachel. His father, Robert Barker, described him as a good bloke, always helping out, a sentiment echoed by neighbors who saw Shane as a reliable presence, quick to lend a hand. Nolene and Cedric Jordan, by contrast, were a couple whose lives seemed to carry the weight of unspoken burdens. Nolene, born in 1944, was a petite woman with sharp eyes and a reserved demeanor, known in Swansea for her involvement in community events, but also for her fierce protectiveness over her daughter, Rachel. Cedric, a retired laborer with a weathered face and a quiet intensity, had a reputation for keeping to himself, his past marked by minor run-ins with the law over property disputes. The couple lived in a modest home on Shaw Street, surrounded by the rugged beauty of Tasmania's east coast. Their relationship with Shane had soured during his marriage to Rachel, with tensions over financial support and family dynamics festering long after the separation. Court records later revealed that Nolene, in particular, harbored a deep resentment toward Shane, believing he had mistreated Rachel and failed to provide for Emily. This grudge, fueled by years of perceived slights, set the stage for a tragedy that would unfold with chilling precision. The events of August 2nd, 2009, began with a plan that had been brewing for weeks. Nolene and Cedric, according to prosecution evidence, had grown increasingly fixated on Shane, their conversations at home turning to how to deal with him. A text message recovered from Nolene's phone, sent to Cedric on July 30th, read, "He's caused enough pain. Time to end it." The couple's motives were complex, rooted in a mix of loyalty to Rachel and a belief that Shane's death would resolve their daughter's struggles. That Sunday evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nolene and Cedric drove their blue Holden Commodore from Swansea to Campbelltown, a journey of 120 kilometers along the winding Midland Highway. In the trunk, concealed under a tarp, was a .22 rifle fitted with a homemade silencer, a weapon Cedric had owned for years, ostensibly for hunting. The drive was silent, the tension between them palpable, as they approached Shane's home under the cover of darkness. At around 7:30 p.m., Shane was in his driveway, working on his motorcycle under a portable floodlight. The hum of cicadas filled the air, and the street was quiet, save for the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Nolene and Cedric pulled up a block away, parking in the shadow of a gum tree. Cedric, clutching the rifle, stepped out, his movements deliberate. Nolene, according to court testimony, remained in the car but was complicit, her role to act as lookout and driver. As Shane bent over his bike, unaware, Cedric approached, the silenced rifle raised. Four shots rang out, their muted cracks barely disturbing the night. 3 to Shane's back, 1 to his chest. He collapsed instantly, blood pooling on the gravel, his tools clattering to the ground. A neighbor, John Miller, a retired farmer, heard a faint noise and peered out his window but saw nothing amiss in the dark. Cedric returned to the car, and the couple sped back to Swansea, leaving Shane's body to be discovered the next morning by a delivery driver, who called 000 at 6:15 a.m. The Campbelltown police station, a small outpost staffed by a handful of officers, was thrust into action on August 3, 2009. Constable Sarah Evans, one of the first on the scene, described the driveway as a horror show, with Shane's body slumped beside his motorcycle, his face frozen in shock. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Michael Adams at Launceston General Hospital, confirmed 4 gunshot wounds, the fatal shot piercing Shane's heart. The use of a silencer suggested premeditation, a detail that chilled investigators. Detective Inspector David Plumpton, a seasoned officer with Tasmania Police, took charge of what would become the state's highest-profile cold case. Initial inquiries focused on Shane's personal life, his recent separation, his work at the garage, and any debts or disputes. But no leads panned out, and the trail went cold, despite a $500,000 reward offered by Tasmania Police, the largest in the state's history. Robert Barker, Shane's father, became a vocal advocate for justice. His pleas for information featured in the Examiner and the Advocate, his grief raw as he told reporters, "Someone knows something. My boy didn't deserve this." For nearly a decade, the case remained unsolved, a wound that festered in Campbelltown. Robert, battling illness, died in 2018 without answers, his final interview with the Examiner haunting, "I just want to know why they took my son." The breakthrough came in 2020, sparked by a tip from an anonymous informant, a former Swansea neighbor who overheard Cedric boasting about fixing a problem years earlier. Detectives reopened the case, leveraging advances in forensic technology and mobile data analysis. Cell tower records placed Nolene's phone along the Midland Highway on the night of the murder, contradicting her 2009 interview with then-Detective Sergeant Phil Barrett, where she claimed to have been at her father's house in Swansea, delivering a steak and kidney meal. The lie unraveled further when police confirmed the couple's car had been serviced by DJ Motors in Hobart on July 24th, debunking their story of visiting Shane on July 26th to borrow a crowbar for repairs. On May 11, 2020, Tasmania police arrested Nolene and Cedric at their Swansea home, charging them with Shane's murder. The Examiner reported the arrests with a headline that captured the community's shock: "Swansea couple charged in decade-old Campbelltown murder." The arrests sent ripples through Tasmania, a region unaccustomed to such high-profile crimes. Shane's daughter, Emily, now 16, was living with Rachel in Launceston, her childhood overshadowed by her father's death. Rachel, who had remarried, declined to speak publicly but issued a statement through her lawyer. "Shane was a good father. We want justice for him and for Emily." The community, still grieving, held a vigil at Campbelltown's War Memorial, where candles flickered in Shane's memory. The case's complexity, its long dormancy, the family ties, and the couple's age, drew national attention, with ABC News noting the extraordinary nature of a cold case solved after 11 years. Nolene and Cedric, now 65 and 68, appeared in Hobart Magistrates Court on May 11, 2020, before Magistrate Michael Daly. Cedric entered a not guilty plea, his face stoic, while Nolene's lawyer, Greg Barnes, sought an adjournment until June 4th for her to enter a plea. Both were remanded in custody, their bail denied due to the severity of the charges. The investigation, led by Acting Assistant Commissioner Ian Wish-Wilson, uncovered a trove of evidence. The .22 rifle, recovered from a shed at the Jordan Swansea property, matched the caliber of the bullets found in Shane's body, though years of exposure made ballistic testing inconclusive. Mobile data was damning, showing Nolene's phone pinging towers along the route to Campbelltown at the time of the murder. A search of their home revealed a notebook with cryptic entries, one dated July 2009 reading, "Hi ST, after dark, make it quick." Witnesses, including a former friend of Cedric's, testified to overhearing the couple discuss Shane with disdain, Cedric once saying, "He's no good for Rachel or the kid." The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Linda Mason, built a case around premeditation, arguing that Nolene and Cedric acted with common intention to kill Shane, driven by a desire to protect Rachel and eliminate a perceived threat to their family's stability. The trial began on February 7, 2023, in the Launceston Supreme Court, a grand sandstone building that stood as a symbol of justice in Tasmania's north. Justice Alan Pierce presided, his calm authority guiding a 12-week trial that captivated the state. Nolene and Cedric, now 68 and 71, sat side by side, their faces lined with age but betraying little emotion. The courtroom was packed with reporters from the Examiner and the Advocate, alongside Shane's family and curious locals. Emily, now 18, attended every day, her presence a quiet testament to her father's memory. Mason opened with a powerful statement. Nolene and Cedric Jordan drove to Campbelltown with a rifle and a plan, ambushing Shane Barker in his own driveway, robbing him of his life and his daughter of her father. The prosecution's case was meticulous, weaving together phone records, witness testimony, and the couple's inconsistent alibis. Key evidence included the mobile data, presented by forensic analyst Dr. Emma Chun, who mapped Nolene's phone movements along the Midland Highway, contradicting her claim of being in Swansea. The notebook entry, analyzed by a handwriting expert, was linked to Nolene, its chilling brevity suggesting intent. A neighbor, John Miller, testified to hearing muffled pops on the night of the murder, though he hadn't connected them to gunshots at the time. The most contentious moment came when Rachel Jordan took the stand, her voice trembling as she described her parents' disdain for Shane. "They thought he was a loser," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know they'd go this far." Her testimony, reported in The Advocate, was a turning point, humanizing the family's pain and exposing the depth of the Jordans' resentment. Nolene's defense, led by Fran McCracken, argued that the prosecution's case was a jigsaw with missing pieces, questioning the reliability of the mobile data and suggesting Shane's death could have been linked to debts or disputes at his garage. Cedric's lawyer, Patrick O'Halloran, insisted there was no direct evidence tying his client to the shooting, pointing to the lack of conclusive ballistics. Both defenses leaned heavily on the couple's age and lack of prior violent convictions, painting them as unlikely killers. A psychiatrist, Dr. Lisa Wong, testified that Nolene suffered from anxiety, potentially clouding her judgment, though she stopped short of claiming insanity. Cedric did not testify, his silence a stark contrast to Nolene's earlier police interview, where her laughter and evasion struck investigators as odd. The jury, after hearing 12 weeks of testimony, deliberated for 3 days. On April 28, 2023, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict for both Nolene and Cedric, finding them equally responsible for Shane's murder. The Examiner's headline captured the moment: Swansea couple convicted in Shane Barker's cold case murder. The sentencing hearing on May 10, 2023, was a moment of raw emotion. Emily, now studying nursing, read a victim impact statement, her voice steady but heavy with grief. "Dad taught me how to ride a bike, how to laugh through tough times," she said, addressing the Jordans directly. "You took him from me, and I'll never forgive you." Her words, reported by The Advocate, resonated with the packed courtroom, where Shane's friends wept openly. Robert Barker's sister, Helen, submitted a written statement describing the family's decade of pain and her brother's unfulfilled hope for justice. Justice Pierce, in his sentencing remarks, called the murder a calculated act of vengeance, noting that Cedric fired the shots but Nolene was equally culpable for her role in planning and enabling the crime. He sentenced both to 22 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 14 years, meaning they would be in their 80s before eligible for release. "You drove to Campbelltown with a shared intent to kill," Pierce said, his voice firm. "Your lies and cover-up prolonged a family's suffering." Outside the court, Emily spoke briefly to the examiner, her words measured but resolute. "Dad can rest now, and so can we a little." The community, long haunted by the case, rallied around Emily, raising funds for a memorial bench in Shane's name at Campbelltown's recreation ground. The bench, inscribed with "Shane Barker, loved forever," became a place of quiet reflection where locals left flowers and motorcycle trinkets. Nolene and Cedric, now at Risdon Prison, lodged appeals in July 2023, handled by barristers James Oxley and Olivia Jenkins. The Court of Criminal Appeal, presided over by Justice Stephen Escart, scheduled a hearing for November 2023, with arguments focusing on the jury's composition. 2 jurors had a pre-existing relationship, and the admission of a police video. The appeal's outcome remains unresolved in public records, but the conviction stood as of the latest reports. The aftermath was a slow healing for Campbelltown. Emily, supported by Rachel and her stepfather, continued her studies, dedicating her nursing career to her father's memory. The Barker family, through Helen, established a scholarship for local youth, funded by community donations, to honor Shane's love of mechanics. Swansea, where Nolene and Cedric once lived, grappled with its own reckoning, neighbors reflecting on the couple's quiet life and the darkness they concealed. The case sparked broader discussions in Tasmania, covered by The Advocate, about family violence and the long shadow of unresolved grudges. A 2023 editorial called for better mental health support in rural areas, arguing that early intervention might have prevented the tragedy. The Nolene June Jordan case remains a stark reminder of how family ties can twist into something deadly. Shane Barker's memory endures in the stories told by those who loved him. His laugh, his love for his daughter, his passion for the open road. The High Street house, now occupied by a young family, bears no trace of that night, but Campbelltown carries the weight of its loss. Emily visits the memorial bench each year, her fingers tracing her father's name, a quiet vow to keep his light alive. Story 4. The neon lights of Club 616 flickered against the humid night air of Lantana, Florida, on November 7, 1997, casting a glow that spilled onto the cracked pavement of the parking lot. Inside, the bar pulsed with the rhythm of a jukebox, the clink of glasses, and the low hum of conversation. William Earl Molt, a 40-year-old mortgage broker known to his friends as Bill, sat at a corner table, nursing a drink. He was a quiet man, not one for the nightlife, but tonight he had ventured out, seeking a break from the routine of his suburban life. His sandy hair caught the dim light, and his reserved demeanor set him apart from the boisterous crowd. At 9:30 p.m., he picked up his phone, his fingers steady despite the drinks he'd had, and called his girlfriend, Cheryl. "I'll be home soon," he said, his voice calm, reassuring. She smiled through the phone, picturing him in his white 1994 Saturn SL, winding through the familiar streets of Lantana. But as the clock ticked past 11 p.m., and Bill's car never pulled into the driveway, a quiet unease began to settle over Cheryl's heart. Bill Molt, a man who lived a life of quiet predictability, had vanished into the night. Bill's life was one of steady, unassuming routine. Born in 1957, he grew up in Brooklyn, New York, before moving to Florida in his 20s, drawn by the promise of warm winters and new opportunities. He settled in Lantana, a small coastal town where palm trees swayed against the backdrop of strip malls and quiet neighborhoods. As a mortgage broker, Bill was meticulous, his days spent poring over paperwork, helping families secure their slice of the American dream. He wasn't flashy. His wardrobe consisted of khakis and polo shirts, his car a practical sedan. But he was reliable, the kind of man who always called when he said he would. He shared a modest home with Cheryl, their relationship a steady anchor in a world that could feel chaotic. They weren't married, but their bond was deep, built on shared evenings watching TV and planning for a future that seemed just within reach. Bill had no enemies, no dark secrets, at least none that anyone knew. To those who loved him, his disappearance was not just a mystery, but an impossibility. The morning of November 8, 1997, dawned with a heavy stillness. Cheryl woke to an empty bed, her worry from the night before now a gnawing panic. She called Bill's phone, but it rang unanswered, the sound echoing in her ears like a warning. She contacted his family, his brother Robert and sister Linda, who lived nearby, and together they retraced his steps. The staff at Club 616 confirmed what Cheryl already knew. Bill had been there, quiet as always, sipping a few drinks but showing no signs of intoxication. He left alone around 11 p.m., climbing into his Saturn, the engine humming as he pulled out of the lot. No one saw anything unusual, no arguments, no suspicious figures lurking in the shadows. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole, car and all. By midday, Cheryl and Bill's family reported him missing to the Lantana Police Department. Officer Maria Delgado, a young but determined detective, took the initial report, her pen moving quickly as she noted the details. 40 years old, 5 feet 10 inches, medium build, last seen driving a white Saturn SL. She visited Club 616, interviewing bartenders and patrons, but their stories were consistent. Bill was unremarkable, a man who kept to himself. Delgado drove the route from the club to Bill's home, a 15-minute stretch along Lantana Road, scanning for any sign of a crash or abandoned vehicle. The roads were clear, the ditches empty. She called in a helicopter unit to sweep the area from above, their blades slicing through the humid air as they searched canals and wooded lots. Nothing. The case, barely a day old, was already slipping toward the cold, unyielding grip of the unknown. For Cheryl, the days that followed were a blur of anguish and action. She plastered missing person flyers across Lantana, Bill's face smiling back from telephone poles and storefront windows. His photo, taken at a family barbecue the previous summer, showed a man with kind eyes and a shy smile, his arm around Cheryl. Missing, William Earl Molt, the flyers read, listing his height, weight, and the details of his car. Friends and neighbors joined the effort, combing fields and checking local businesses, their footsteps heavy with hope that faded with each passing hour. Robert, Bill's older brother, took to knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen a white Saturn or heard anything unusual that night. Linda, his sister, sat with Cheryl at night, the two women clutching coffee mugs as they tried to make sense of the impossible. "He wouldn't just leave," Cheryl said, her voice breaking. "Something happened to him." The Lantana police, under pressure from a community rattled by the disappearance, expanded their investigation. Delgado and her partner, Detective James Carter, considered every possibility. Was Bill the victim of a robbery gone wrong? There was no evidence of a struggle, no blood or debris at the club's parking lot. Had he chosen to disappear, overwhelmed by some unseen pressure? His bank accounts showed no unusual activity, and his personal life, by all accounts, was stable. Carter suggested a car accident, a plausible scenario given the dark, winding roads around Lantana. But searches of nearby highways, canals, and retention ponds, common in Florida's low-lying landscape, yielded nothing. The police checked hospitals, jails, even homeless shelters, but Bill's name appeared nowhere. The case began to cool, the initial urgency giving way to the slow grind of an unsolved mystery. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The world moved on, but for Cheryl and the Molt family, time stood still. They held vigils on the anniversary of Bill's disappearance, gathering at a local church where candles flickered against the evening sky. Cheryl kept Bill's belongings untouched, his favorite jacket hanging in the closet, his paperwork stacked neatly on his desk, as if preserving them might somehow bring him back. She visited a psychic once, desperate for answers, but the vague promises of closure only deepened her frustration. The media, initially eager to cover the story, moved on to other tragedies, leaving Bill's case to fade into the archives. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System listed him as case number MP20695, a sterile designation that belied the human toll of his absence. In the years that followed, Lantana changed. The small town grew, its quiet streets giving way to new developments and bustling subdivisions. The Grand Isles, a housing community in nearby Wellington, about 20 miles from Lantana, sprang up in the late 1990s, its manicured lawns and modern homes a symbol of Florida's booming real estate market. A retention pond, dug to manage stormwater, sat at the edge of the neighborhood, its murky waters reflecting the sky. No one paid it much attention. It was just another feature of the suburban landscape, a place where children tossed stones and egrets waded in the shallows. But beneath its surface, hidden from view, lay a secret that would remain buried for over 2 decades. The breakthrough came in August 2019, in a way that seemed almost too surreal to be true. Barry Fay, a 50-year-old resident of the Grand Isles, was at home one evening when he received a call from a former neighbor, a man who had moved away years earlier. The former neighbor, idly browsing Google Earth to reminisce about his old home, had zoomed in on the retention pond at Moon Bay Circle. There, in the satellite imagery, was something unmistakable: the outline of a car, its white roof barely visible beneath the water's surface. "You should check it out," he told Fay, his voice tinged with curiosity. Fay, skeptical but intrigued, borrowed a drone from a friend and flew it over the pond. The drone's camera confirmed it, a vehicle submerged and calcified, its shape eerily clear against the muddy bottom. Fay's heart sank as he dialed the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, unaware that he was about to unravel a mystery that had haunted a family for 22 years. On August 28, 2019, deputies arrived at Moon Bay Circle, their vehicles lining the quiet street as curious neighbors gathered. A dive team suited up, their equipment clanking as they descended into the pond's murky depths. The water was thick with sediment, visibility near zero, but the divers worked methodically, their hands probing the mud until they felt the hard edge of a car. It was a 1994 Saturn SL, its once white exterior now encrusted with algae and corrosion. As the tow truck pulled the vehicle from the water, its frame groaned, water pouring from its shattered windows. Inside, the divers found skeletal remains, the bones brittle and weathered by years underwater. The discovery sent a chill through the crowd, and for Cheryl, who was notified by phone, it was a moment of both closure and renewed grief. "I knew he didn't leave me," she whispered to Linda, tears streaming down her face. The Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's office took over, using dental records to confirm what everyone suspected. The remains were those of William Earl Molt. The car matched the description of Bill's Saturn, and the location, though 20 miles from Lantana, was plausible given the route he might have taken that night. The Grand Isles had been under construction in 1997, its roads unpaved and poorly lit, the retention pond a new feature with no barriers or signs to warn drivers. Sheriff spokesperson Terry Barbera spoke to the press, her voice measured but somber. "We believe he lost control of his vehicle and drove into the pond," she said, citing the lack of evidence for foul play. "The exact circumstances may never be known, but he's been found." The explanation was simple, almost painfully so: a tragic accident, a moment of misjudgment in the dark, and a life lost to the unforgiving waters. The discovery was both a resolution and a revelation. The car had been visible on Google Earth since at least 2007, its image captured in satellite photos that anyone could access. Yet, for 12 years, it had gone unnoticed, a silent testament to the limits of human observation. The former neighbor's chance discovery, prompted by nostalgia, had done what years of police searches could not. The story made headlines, from the BBC to the Washington Post, with outlets marveling at the role of technology in solving a decades-old mystery. The Charlie Project, an online database of missing persons, updated Bill's profile to resolved, noting the eerie fact that his car had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. "It's heartbreaking," Cheryl told a reporter from the Palm Beach Post, her voice heavy with the weight of 22 years. "He was right there, and we didn't know." For the Molt family, the discovery brought answers, but also new questions. How had Bill ended up in Wellington, so far from his usual route? Had he taken a wrong turn, disoriented by the drinks or the unfamiliar roads? The police found no evidence of intoxication beyond the few drinks he'd had, and witnesses at the club insisted he seemed sober when he left. Some speculated that the construction in the Grand Isles, with its unmarked roads and open lots, had confused him, leading him to the pond's edge. Others wondered if he'd been distracted, perhaps by a phone call or a moment of fatigue. The lack of skid marks or defensive damage to the car suggested he hadn't tried to stop, a detail that haunted Cheryl. "Did he even know what was happening?" she asked Robert one night, her voice barely audible. The community of Lantana, too, was shaken by the news. Neighbors who had known Bill gathered at a local diner, sharing memories of a man who was kind but reserved, always quick with a smile. The Grand Isles residents, many of whom had lived there for years, were stunned to learn a car had been in their pond all along. Lori Martin, who lived across from the pond, spoke to ABC 11, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They came knocking on our door and asked how long we'd been here," she said. "We told them 9 years, and they said, 'Did you know there was a car in the lake?'" The revelation sparked conversations about the unseen dangers of retention ponds, common in Florida but rarely secured, and the power of technology to uncover what human eyes had missed. Cheryl and the Molt family held a small memorial for Bill in September 2019, a quiet gathering at the church where they had once held vigils. They scattered his ashes in the Atlantic Ocean, the waves lapping gently as Cheryl spoke of his love for the sea. "He's at peace now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. The closure was bittersweet, a resolution that came too late to heal the years of pain, but offered a chance to move forward. Cheryl kept one of Bill's flyers, its edges worn from years of handling, as a reminder of the man she'd loved and the mystery that had defined her life for so long. The case of William Earl Molt became a touchstone for discussions about missing persons and the role of technology in solving cold cases. Groups like Adventures with Purpose, a YouTube channel dedicated to finding submerged vehicles, cited Bill's case as an example of how sonar and drones could aid investigations. The story also highlighted the challenges of searching Florida's waterways, where murky ponds and shifting water levels could hide evidence for decades. For Detective Delgado, now a seasoned investigator, the case was a reminder of the limits of her early efforts. "We looked everywhere we could," she told a colleague, her voice heavy with regret. "But sometimes the answers are just out of reach." The retention pond at Moon Bay Circle is still there, its surface calm, its secrets now revealed. The Grand Isles has grown, its homes filled with families who know little of the tragedy that unfolded before their neighborhood existed. But for those who loved Bill Molt, the pond is a place of quiet reverence, a marker of a life lost and a mystery solved. Cheryl visits sometimes, standing at the water's edge, her thoughts drifting to that November night. She imagines Bill's car slipping into the darkness, the water closing over it, and wonders what he felt in those final moments. The answers may never come, but the truth, uncovered by a chance glance at a satellite image, has given her a measure of peace, a fragile gift after 22 years of waiting. Story 5. The wind swept across the open fields of Hamilton, Michigan, on a chilly March evening in 1989, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and budding trees. In a modest farmhouse on a quiet stretch of 136th Avenue, 14-year-old Andrea Bowman sat on her bed, her knees pulled to her chest, staring out the window at the fading light. Her room was small, cluttered with posters of pop stars and a worn stuffed bear she'd had since she was a toddler. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards and the low hum of a television in the living room, where her adoptive parents, Dennis and Brenda Bowman, sat unaware of the storm brewing in their daughter's heart. Andrea's world, once a place of small-town simplicity, had become a cage of secrets and fear. She had told someone, her school counselor, her friend Jennifer, even her adoptive mother, about the darkness in her home, about the abuse she suffered at the hands of Dennis. But no one had believed her, or they hadn't wanted to. And now she was gone. 30 years later, in a small Virginia town, Detective John Smith sat at his desk in the Norfolk Police Department's cold case homicide unit, surrounded by stacks of files and a flickering computer screen. His office smelled of old paper and coffee, the kind that had been sitting in a pot too long. He was reviewing a case from 1980, the murder of Kathleen Doyle, a 25-year-old woman found strangled in her home. A new DNA match had just come through, pointing to a man named Dennis Bowman, a 70-year-old former Navy reservist living in Michigan. As Smith dug deeper, he stumbled across another name, Andrea Bowman, Dennis's adopted daughter, missing since 1989. The connection sent a chill through him. Two cases, decades apart, tied to one man. What he uncovered next would unravel a tragedy that had been buried for 3 decades, a story of betrayal, loss, and a mother's relentless quest for truth. Andrea's story began long before that March night in Hamilton. Born Alexis Miranda Badger on June 23, 1974, in New Orleans, Louisiana, she entered the world under a cloud of hardship. Her mother, Kathy Turkanian, was just 16, a runaway who had fled her own troubled home and married a 19-year-old named Randy Badger. Kathy was young, overwhelmed, and ill-equipped to raise a child. When Alexis was 9 months old, Kathy's mother fell ill, and her marriage crumbled. Faced with an impossible choice, Kathy placed her daughter for adoption, believing it was the best chance for a stable, loving life. Alexis was adopted at 21 months by Dennis and Brenda Bowman, a couple from Hamilton, Michigan, who seemed to embody the wholesome promise of small-town America. They renamed her Andrea Michelle Bowman, and for a time, life appeared idyllic. Dennis and Brenda had met in high school, marrying in 1971 after a whirlwind romance. Dennis, a lanky man with sharp features and a quick temper, was a Navy reservist who moved his young family between San Diego, Norfolk, and eventually back to West Michigan. Brenda, soft-spoken and devout, was the anchor of the household, her faith guiding her through the challenges of a marriage that wasn't always easy. They had been told they couldn't conceive, so adopting Andrea was a blessing, a chance to build the family they dreamed of. When Andrea was 13, Brenda gave birth to a daughter, Vanessa, a surprise that shifted the family's dynamic. Andrea, once the center of their world, began to feel like an outsider. By the time she was 14, Andrea was a bright, sensitive girl with a cascade of dark hair and a smile that hid her growing unease. At Hamilton High School, she was well-liked, a regular at church youth group, and a friend to those who needed one. But beneath her cheerful exterior, something was wrong. In late 1988, she confided in her friend Jennifer Jones, a classmate with whom she shared secrets over late-night phone calls. "He's hurting me," Andrea whispered, her voice trembling. "My dad. He's doing things he shouldn't." Jennifer, barely a teenager herself, urged Andrea to tell someone. Andrea did. She spoke to her school counselor, who alerted the police. A social worker visited the Bowman home, confronting Dennis and Brenda with Andrea's allegations of sexual abuse. But Dennis denied everything, his voice smooth and convincing, and Brenda backed him up, claiming Andrea was acting out because she'd recently learned she was adopted. The social worker left, and Andrea was sent back to her room, her accusations dismissed as teenage rebellion. The dismissal crushed her. Andrea began to withdraw, her grades slipping, her once vibrant spirit dimming. She told another friend, Arlene Ron's son, about the abuse, hoping someone would listen. Arlene, a local mother, overheard and felt a pang of unease, but when she dropped Andrea off at home one evening, Dennis appeared in the driveway, his eyes cold. "Stay out of my business," he warned, and Arlene, intimidated, said nothing to authorities. Andrea's cries for help went unanswered, and the weight of her secret grew heavier. On March 11, 1989, Andrea vanished. Dennis told police she had stolen $100 from their dresser, and some change from Vanessa's piggy bank, then run away to find her real mother. Brenda, frantic, called the police repeatedly in the days that followed, reporting unconfirmed sightings of Andrea at a grocery store, a skating rink, even as far away as Indiana. But the sightings were vague, unverified, and soon dried up. The police classified Andrea as a runaway, a label that stuck for decades, despite the red flags. Dennis had a criminal history, assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct in 1980, for which he'd served 5 years, and a 1998 conviction for breaking into a coworker's home. Yet, the investigation into Andrea's disappearance went cold, buried under the assumption that she had chosen to leave. Kathy Turkanian had no idea her daughter was missing until 2010, when a letter from the adoption agency arrived at her home in Norfolk, Virginia. Now a retired nurse, Kathy had spent years wondering about the daughter she'd given up, a girl she still thought of as Alexis. The letter asked for a DNA sample to compare with unidentified remains found in Wisconsin, known as the Racine County Jane Doe. Kathy's heart sank as she learned that Andrea had vanished in 1989, at just 14 years old. The DNA didn't match the Jane Doe, but the news ignited something in Kathy, a fierce, unyielding determination to find out what had happened to her daughter. Kathy threw herself into the search. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests, uncovering Dennis Bowman's criminal record, the 1980 assault, the 1998 break-in, and whispers of other incidents. "This man killed my daughter," she told herself, the certainty settling like a stone in her gut. She set up a Facebook page, Justice for Andrea M. Bowman, posting pleas for information and confronting Dennis and Brenda directly. She called their home relentlessly, her voice sharp with accusation. She even put up a billboard near their house, offering $11,000 for information leading to an arrest. Brenda, shaken, insisted Andrea had run away, showing Kathy a binder filled with missing person flyers and notes about supposed sightings. But Kathy wasn't convinced. She teamed up with Carl Koppelman, a forensic accountant and amateur sleuth, whose meticulous research complemented her fiery resolve. Together, they dug into Dennis's past, piecing together a pattern of violence that stretched across decades. In Hamilton, life went on for the Bowmans. Dennis and Brenda moved to a new property, a mobile home on a rural lot, shortly after Andrea's disappearance. Vanessa, their biological daughter, grew up unaware of the shadow cast by her sister's absence. Brenda clung to her faith, quoting Bible verses to justify her loyalty to Dennis. "I haven't forgotten what he did, but I forgive him," she told Koppelman during a tense confrontation at a 2013 Missing in Michigan conference. Kathy, unable to hold back, exploded at Brenda, accusing her of enabling Dennis's abuse. The exchange left Brenda rattled but unwavering, her belief in her husband's story unshaken. The breakthrough came in November 2019, not in Michigan but in Norfolk, Virginia. Detective John Smith, working the Kathleen Doyle case, had been chasing leads on a 1980 murder that had haunted the department for nearly 4 decades. Kathleen, a 25-year-old newlywed, was found strangled in her home on September 11, 1980, her body bearing signs of sexual assault and a mysterious burn mark from a scorched Lincoln log toy. DNA evidence, preserved on her bedspread, had gone unmatched for years until a new test pointed to Dennis Bowman. Smith learned that Dennis had been in Norfolk at the time, attending a 2-week Navy training camp. When Smith met Detective Sergeant Brian Fuller of the Michigan State Police at a conference, Fuller mentioned Andrea's case, noting Dennis's history and the suspicions that had lingered for years. The connection was undeniable. Dennis was arrested in Allegan County, Michigan, on November 22, 2019, for Kathleen's murder. As he sat in a holding cell, awaiting extradition to Virginia, investigators from Michigan, led by Detective Lieutenant Todd Workman, began questioning him about Andrea. Workman's team took a patient approach, building rapport with Dennis, listening to his stories before pressing him on his daughter's disappearance. In December 2019, during a visit with Brenda, Dennis broke. "I slapped her," he said, his voice low. She fell down the stairs and died. He claimed it was an accident, that Andrea had been arguing with him about her behavior, but his story shifted with each telling. In one version, she was still moaning after the fall. In another, he'd panicked and hidden her body in a barn. He later admitted to dismembering her with a machete and axe, stuffing her remains into a cardboard barrel mixed with diapers and wrappers, and burying it behind their new property under a thin layer of cement. He even told Brenda the machete, potentially bearing Andrea's DNA, was still under their bed. In February 2020, police searched the Bowman property on 136th Avenue. Kathy, who had long suspected Andrea was buried there, had marked the spot on Google Earth years earlier. Her hunch was right. Andrea's skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave, exactly where Dennis said they would be. The discovery was a gut punch, confirmation of the worst fears Kathy had carried for a decade. "I got her out of the ground," Kathy said, her voice thick with grief and triumph. "It's like she's been screaming from that backyard for years." The legal proceedings moved swiftly. In June 2020, Dennis pleaded guilty in Norfolk to the rape and murder of Kathleen Doyle, receiving 2 life sentences plus 20 years for burglary, with no possibility of parole. In December 2021, in Allegan County Circuit Court, he entered a no-contest plea to second-degree murder in Andrea's death, accepting a sentence of 35 to 50 years. The plea deal, negotiated partly to keep him closer to Brenda in Michigan, a promise the police later reneged on, ensured he would never walk free again. At 75, Dennis was incarcerated at the River North Correctional Center in Virginia, his days confined to a cell, his crimes finally exposed. The trial was a quiet affair, overshadowed by the weight of the truth. Brenda testified, her voice steady but hollow, admitting she had dismissed Andrea's allegations as lies. "I told her it wasn't true," she said, recounting how she'd pressured Andrea to recant. Her loyalty to Dennis remained, even after his confession, rooted in her marriage vows and a faith that seemed to blind her to his darkness. Kathy, sitting in the courtroom, felt a mix of rage and pity. She had fought for Andrea when no one else would, but the victory was bittersweet. Her daughter was gone, her life reduced to bones in a barrel. The case of Andrea Bowman left scars that stretched far beyond Hamilton. For Kathy Turkanian, it was a decade-long crusade that gave her purpose but no peace. She continued to run the Justice for Andrea Facebook page, sharing updates and advocating for other missing children. In Hamilton, the community grappled with its own guilt. Neighbors who had known the Bowmans, teachers who had seen Andrea's fear, and police who had dismissed her as a troubled teen all carried the weight of what might have been. Detective Sergeant Sarah Krebs, reflecting on the case in 2020, told the Detroit Free Press that Dennis's arrest prompted a review of other cold cases from the 1980s and 1990s in areas where he had lived. There were whispers of other victims: a 1979 rape in Holland, a 1989 attempted abduction of a 6-year-old girl named Meta McLeod, but no further charges were filed. Andrea's life, brief and marked by pain, became a symbol of resilience and the power of a mother's love. Kathy Turkanian never met her daughter, but she gave her a voice, pulling her from the shadows of a backyard grave. For those who followed the case, it was a haunting reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, cloaked in the ordinary: a church-going couple, a rural farmhouse, a man who was both father and monster. Dennis Bowman would die in prison, but Andrea's story lived on, carried by those who refused to let her be forgotten. Story 6. In the quiet, working-class neighborhood of Riverside, California, the night of February 24, 2006, was unremarkable until a gunshot shattered the stillness. The sound echoed through the streets of Arlanza, a community where families lived modestly, their lives intertwined by proximity and routine. Crystal Theobald, a 24-year-old mother of 2, sat in her car that evening, unaware that her life was about to be stolen in a senseless act of violence. Her story, one of love, loss, and an extraordinary quest for justice, would unfold over the next decade, revealing the depths of a mother's determination and the complexities of a crime driven by mistaken identity. Crystal was the heart of her family, a young woman whose warmth and resilience defined her. Born in 1982, she grew up in Riverside, a city of sprawling suburbs and industrial edges, where the Inland Empire's sun-baked streets were both home and battleground for many. Crystal was no stranger to hardship. Her father, Larry Theobald, and mother, Belinda Lane, had raised her and her siblings in a close-knit household, but life had not always been kind. Crystal had faced personal struggles, including a tumultuous relationship with her boyfriend, Justin Green, and the challenges of raising her two daughters, Alexis and Jocelyn, while navigating the uncertainties of young adulthood. Yet, those who knew her spoke of her infectious smile, her fierce love for her children, and her dreams of a better future. She was a woman who, despite life's weight, carried a spark that drew people to her. On that fateful night, Crystal was in a white Ford Explorer with Justin and her cousin, Jamie Paredes, parked near the intersection of Rutland and Gibson Avenues. The evening was cool, the sky clear, and the trio was engaged in a mundane conversation, the kind that fills the spaces between life's bigger moments. Crystal's daughters were at home with Belinda, and for a brief moment, the world seemed calm. But in the shadows, danger was approaching. A white SUV, driven by members of the 5150 gang, a local outfit known for its territorial disputes and violent tendencies, cruised through the neighborhood. The gang members, fueled by a mix of bravado and paranoia, were on the hunt for rivals they believed were encroaching on their turf. They mistook Crystal's vehicle for one belonging to a member of the Mad Dog Vados, a rival gang, and decided to act. Without warning, a barrage of gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the Explorer's windows, shattering glass and piercing the night. Crystal, seated in the front passenger seat, was struck in the head. Justin, in the driver's seat, was hit in the stomach, and Jamie, in the back, escaped unharmed but was frozen in terror. The SUV sped off, its occupants disappearing into the labyrinth of Riverside streets. Justin, clutching his wound, managed to drive a short distance before pulling over, his strength fading. Jamie scrambled to call for help, her screams piercing the night as neighbors emerged, drawn by the chaos. Paramedics arrived swiftly, but for Crystal it was too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene, her life extinguished in an instant. Justin was rushed to the hospital, where he would survive after emergency surgery, but the loss of Crystal left a void that would never be filled. The Riverside Police Department descended on the scene, cordoning off the area as forensic teams combed for evidence. Shell casings littered the ground, and the white Explorer bore the scars of the attack, bullet holes pocking its frame. Detectives quickly pieced together the basics: a drive-by shooting, likely gang-related, targeting the wrong vehicle. The 5150 gang, named after California's code for involuntary psychiatric holds, was notorious in Arlanza for its involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, and violence. But identifying the perpetrators would prove challenging. Witnesses were scarce, and the gang's code of silence loomed large. For Belinda Lane, Crystal's mother, the news of her daughter's death was a sledgehammer to the heart. She collapsed in grief, her world unraveling as she grappled with the reality that her vibrant, loving daughter was gone. Belinda was no stranger to pain. A single mother who had raised Crystal and her siblings through financial struggles and personal challenges, she was a woman of fierce resolve. Her home was a sanctuary, filled with photos of her children and grandchildren, a testament to the family she had fought to hold together. Crystal's death shattered that sanctuary, but it also ignited something in Belinda, a burning need for justice. She vowed to find those responsible, no matter the cost. As the police investigation began, Belinda refused to sit idly by. She turned to an unlikely tool, MySpace, the social media platform that was, in 2006, a digital hub for young people. Belinda created a profile under a pseudonym, posing as a teenager to infiltrate the online world of Riverside's gang culture. Her goal was simple but daunting: to uncover clues about the men who had killed her daughter. The investigation, led by Detective Rick Wheeler, was methodical but slow. The police had few leads beyond the description of a white SUV and the knowledge that the 5150 gang was likely involved. Gang-related cases were notoriously difficult to crack, as fear of retaliation often silenced potential witnesses. Wheeler, a seasoned investigator with a calm demeanor and a knack for connecting with communities, knew the case would require patience. He interviewed Justin and Jamie, who provided what details they could, but the chaos of the shooting left their recollections fragmented. The police also canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to residents who were reluctant to share information. Arlanza was a community where trust in law enforcement was thin, eroded by years of tension between police and marginalized groups. Meanwhile, Belinda's online sleuthing began to yield results. Posing as a young woman named Rebecca, she befriended members of the 5150 gang on MySpace, engaging in casual conversations to gain their trust. She studied their posts, photos, and connections, piecing together a network of names and faces. One name kept surfacing: Julio Heredia, known as Lil Güero, a 19-year-old gang member with a reputation for volatility. Belinda's heart raced as she read his boasts about the gang's activities, his cryptic references to taking care of business. She passed every scrap of information to Wheeler, who cross-referenced her findings with police intelligence. Heredia, it turned out, was already on their radar, a low-level but ambitious member of 5,150 with a history of minor arrests. As weeks turned into months, the investigation gained traction. A tip from a confidential informant pointed to a white Mercury Mountaineer, matching the description of the SUV used in the shooting. The vehicle was registered to a woman named Martha Garcia, the mother of another 5150 member, William Sotelo. Detectives surveilled Garcia's home, observing the comings and goings of gang members, including Heredia and Sotelo. The police also recovered surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store, which showed the Mountaineer circling the area shortly before the shooting. The grainy images were not definitive, but they bolstered the case against the 5,150 crew. Belinda's grief was a constant companion, but it fueled her determination. She spent hours each night on MySpace, her eyes burning from the screen's glow as she navigated the digital underworld. She corresponded with gang members, carefully crafting messages to elicit information without arousing suspicion. One night, she stumbled across a post by Heredia that sent chills down her spine. A photo of him posing with a gun, captioned with a taunt about handling enemies. Belinda screenshot the image and sent it to Wheeler, her hands trembling. The detective cautioned her to be careful. Her amateur sleuthing was risky, and the gang was known for its ruthlessness. But Belinda was undeterred. "They took my daughter," she told Wheeler, her voice steady despite the tears. "I'll do whatever it takes." By late 2006, the police had enough evidence to make arrests. Heredia, Sotelo, and several other 5,150 members were taken into custody, charged with murder, attempted murder, and gang-related offenses. The arrests were a breakthrough, but the case was far from closed. Prosecutors faced the challenge of building a case without direct eyewitness testimony, relying instead on circumstantial evidence, ballistics, and Belinda's MySpace findings. The Riverside County District Attorney's Office, led by Prosecutor John Aki, knew the trial would be a battle. Gang cases often hinged on proving intent and affiliation, and the defense would likely argue that the shooting was a tragic mistake, not a premeditated act. The trial began in 2008, 2 years after Crystal's death. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaotic streets of Arlanza, its polished wood and hushed tones a world away from the violence that had brought everyone there. Belinda sat in the front row, her face a mask of resolve as she listened to the prosecution lay out its case. Aki detailed the events of February 24, 2006, painting a vivid picture of the drive-by shooting that had claimed Crystal's life. He introduced evidence linking the white Mercury Mountaineer to the crime scene, including bullet casings that matched a gun recovered from Heredia's possession. The prosecution also called Justin Green to the stand, who recounted the horror of the shooting, his voice breaking as he described Crystal's final moments. The defense, representing Heredia and Sotelo, argued that the shooting was a case of mistaken identity, not a deliberate murder. They portrayed their clients as young men caught up in a cycle of gang life, acting impulsively rather than with malice. The defense challenged the reliability of the surveillance footage and questioned the credibility of the informant's tip. They also scrutinized Belinda's role, suggesting her MySpace investigation was an act of vengeance that tainted the evidence. But Aki countered with a powerful narrative, emphasizing Crystal's innocence and the gang's reckless disregard for human life. He presented Heredia's MySpace posts as proof of his violent mindset, arguing that the 5150 gang's territorial obsession had led to a preventable tragedy. For Belinda, the trial was an emotional crucible. She listened as witnesses described the night of the shooting, each testimony a reminder of her loss. She watched as Heredia and Sotelo sat impassively, their faces betraying little remorse. During breaks, she clutched photos of Crystal and her granddaughters, drawing strength from their memory. The courtroom was often packed with community members, some there to support the Theobald family, others drawn by the case's notoriety. Riverside had seen its share of gang violence, but Crystal's story struck a chord. Her death was a stark reminder of the collateral damage caused by turf wars. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. The tension in the courthouse was palpable, with Belinda and her family waiting anxiously for the verdict. On a gray morning in late 2008, the jury returned with its decision. Julio Heredia was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and gang enhancements, facing life in prison without parole. William Sotelo was convicted of lesser charges, including voluntary manslaughter, and sentenced to 13 years. Other gang members received varying sentences for their roles in the crime. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow as Belinda wept, her body shaking with the weight of the moment. Justice had been served, but it could not bring Crystal back. The aftermath of the trial was bittersweet. Belinda returned to her home, now quieter without Crystal's laughter. She continued to raise Alexis and Jocelyn, pouring her love into them as she grappled with her grief. The case had drawn attention to Riverside's gang problem, prompting community leaders to push for prevention programs and outreach. Detective Wheeler, who had grown close to the Theobald family, reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It wasn't just about solving a crime, he later said. It was about giving a family some measure of peace. Belinda's MySpace investigation became the stuff of local legend, a testament to a mother's unbreakable spirit. Belinda became an advocate for victims' families, speaking at community events about the need for change. She never fully escaped the pain of losing Crystal, but she found purpose in ensuring her daughter's legacy lived on. Years later, in 2020, the case took a final turn. William Sotelo, who had been released on parole, was rearrested for violating his parole conditions. The news was a painful reminder for Belinda, who had hoped the convictions would close the chapter on her daughter's death. Yet, she remained steadfast, her resolve unshaken. She visited Crystal's grave regularly, placing flowers and speaking softly to her daughter, as if she could still hear her. The cemetery was a place of solace, where the wind carried memories of Crystal's smile and the promise of a life cut short. Crystal Theobald's murder was a tragedy born of senseless violence, but it was also a story of love and resilience. Her family's pursuit of justice, led by Belinda's unwavering determination, exposed the fault lines of a community scarred by gang warfare. The case revealed the fragility of life in places like Arlanza, where a single mistake could shatter families forever. For those who knew Crystal, she was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a mother, a sister, and a friend whose light continued to shine through those she left behind. Her story, etched in the hearts of her loved ones and the records of a Riverside courtroom, serves as a haunting reminder of the cost of violence and the enduring power of a mother's love. Story 7. In the sprawling city of Kazan, where the Volga River winds through a landscape of ancient Kremlins and modern ambitions, the spring of 2011 was a time of uneasy calm. The capital of Tatarstan, a republic in Russia's heartland, was a place where history and progress coexisted, where minarets stood alongside Soviet-era apartment blocks, and where the daily hum of life carried the promise of safety. But beneath this surface, a predator was stirring, a man whose unassuming presence masked a darkness that would claim the lives of dozens. His name was Radek Tadjurov, and he would come to be known as the Volga Maniac, a serial killer whose crimes would haunt a nation and expose the fragility of trust in the places people called home. This is the story of a manhunt that spanned years, a trail of grief that stretched across cities, and a reckoning that came too late for too many. Radek Tadjurov was born in May 1982 in the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, a region that would later become the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. He grew up in Kazan, a city of over 1 million people, where the streets bustled with students, workers, and traders. As a young man, Radek was unremarkable, a quiet figure who blended into the crowd, his face neither handsome nor menacing, his demeanor neither charming nor threatening. He trained as a locksmith, a trade that gave him access to the inner workings of doors and homes, a skill that would later become a tool of terror. By 2009, his life had taken a darker turn. A conviction for petty theft marked the beginning of his descent, and by 2010, he was a vagrant, drifting through Kazan's underbelly, surviving on the edges of society. His days were spent scavenging, his nights in the shadows, a man invisible to those who passed him on the street. The first murder came in March 2011, though no one knew it was the beginning of a spree that would terrify the region. Zinaida Ivanova, an 82-year-old widow, lived alone in a Khrushchevka, one of the modest 5-story apartment buildings that dotted Kazan's neighborhoods. Her life was quiet, her days filled with small rituals, boiling tea in a chipped kettle, knitting scarves for her grandchildren, listening to the radio's soft crackle. She was a woman of routine, her apartment a sanctuary of faded photographs and worn furniture. On a cool evening, a knock came at her door. The man outside introduced himself as a utility worker, his voice polite, his clothing nondescript. Zinaida, trusting as many of her generation were, let him in. She never suspected that the man with the toolbox was not there to fix a pipe, but to take her life. Her body was found the next morning by a neighbor, her apartment door slightly ajar, a detail that sent a chill through the building. Zinaida had been strangled, her frail frame crumpled on the floor, a bathrobe belt tight around her neck. Her few valuables, a gold ring, a small stash of rubles, were gone, the drawers of her modest home rifled through. The police arrived, their boots heavy on the creaking floorboards, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene. The murder was brutal but clean, with no fingerprints, no witnesses, no clear motive beyond theft. The officers chalked it up to a robbery gone wrong, a one-off tragedy in a city where such crimes were rare. But they were wrong. Within weeks, another elderly woman was found dead in a nearby Khrushchevka. Maria Petrova, 78, had been strangled with a scarf, her apartment similarly looted. The police began to notice similarities. The victims were elderly, lived alone, and were killed in their homes by strangulation with improvised items. The method was consistent, the killer's presence fleeting. By June 2011, a third victim, Anna Kuznetsova, 85, was discovered, her body hidden beneath a pile of blankets, her hands bound with a cord. The pattern was undeniable, and the police, now realizing they were dealing with a serial killer, scrambled to respond. The term Volga Maniac began to circulate, a name coined by a journalist who saw in the killer's elusiveness a shadow that haunted the river's edge. Kazan's police station became a hub of frenetic activity. Detectives, led by Captain Ivan Streltsov, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for dogged persistence, pored over case files, their desks cluttered with maps and photographs. Streltsov was in his late 40s, his face etched with lines from years of chasing criminals through Russia's vast regions. He had seen his share of violence, but the Volga Maniac case was different. The killer targeted the most vulnerable, elderly women, often widows, who lived alone in apartments that offered little protection. The crimes were not just murders, but invasions, violations of the sanctity of home. Streltsov felt the weight of each case, the faces of the victims staring back at him from the evidence board, their stories unfinished. The killings continued, spreading beyond Kazan to other cities along the Volga and Ural regions: Ulyanovsk, Nizhny Novgorod, Izhevsk, Perm, Samara, Ufa. By August 2012, the body count had reached 18, each murder following the same chilling script. The killer posed as a maintenance worker, a social services employee, or an electrician, gaining trust with a smile and a clipboard before turning predator. He struck in broad daylight or early evening, slipping into apartments unnoticed, leaving behind only death and absence. The police set up task forces, their efforts sprawling across multiple regions. They interviewed thousands, chasing leads that evaporated like mist. A 1 million ruble reward was offered in 2013, but it yielded nothing. The killer was a ghost, his face captured only once, on a grainy CCTV feed outside a victim's apartment in Ufa, showing a young man with a cap pulled low, his features indistinct but his presence undeniable. The community lived in fear. Elderly women, once the backbone of their neighborhoods, stopped answering their doors. Families installed locks and alarms, their trust in strangers shattered. In Kazan, the Khrushchevkas, once symbols of Soviet progress, became places of dread, their stairwells dark with suspicion. The media fueled the panic, with headlines screaming of the Granny Strangler, a moniker that stuck alongside Volga Maniac. The names were both a warning and a wound, reducing the victims to a collective tragedy while amplifying the killer's infamy. For the families of the victims, the pain was personal. Zenaida's daughter, Elena, visited her mother's grave each week, her hands trembling as she laid flowers, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the killer was still out there. Streltsov's team worked tirelessly, but the lack of evidence was maddening. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA that could be reliably tested with the technology of the early 2010s. One survivor, a blind woman in Kazan, described a man's voice, soft, polite, but could offer no face. The police pursued theories, from a transient criminal to a local with a grudge, but each lead fizzled out. In 2013, a tip suggested the killer might be hiding in Sakhalin Oblast, thousands of kilometers away, but the trail went cold. By 2017, Streltsov's superiors were pressuring him to scale back, the case a drain on resources. Yet he refused to let go, driven by a promise to the victims' families, by the memory of Zenaida's empty apartment, by the need to stop the man who seemed to kill without remorse. The breakthrough came in 2020, years after the murders had stopped. Advances in forensic science had changed the game, and the police, now under new leadership, revisited old evidence. At 2 crime scenes, one in Ulyanovsk and one in Samara, the killer had left traces of sweat on a scarf and a lighter. The samples, once too small to analyze, were now viable. DNA testing, combined with shoeprint analysis, pointed to a single suspect, Radik Tadjirov, a 38-year-old locksmith with a criminal record for theft and arms trafficking. The police were stunned. Tadjirov was a local, a man who had lived among them, his life unremarkable except for his crimes. On December 1st, 2020, they arrested him in Kazan, his face pale as they led him away in handcuffs. Tadjirov's interrogation was a study in contradiction. He confessed to at least 25 murders, his voice breaking as he described the killings, claiming they were born of desperation. "I wanted to eat," he said, his words captured on a police video that would later haunt the public. "I lived partly on the street." He spoke of strangling his victims quickly, believing it was painless, a claim that rang hollow against the brutality of his acts. When asked why he killed instead of just robbing, he faltered, his eyes downcast. "I can't explain," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Yet later, he recanted, claiming the confessions were coerced, that he had been under stress. The police, however, had the DNA, the shoe prints, the pattern of his crimes. The case against him was ironclad. The trial began in October 2022 in the Supreme Court of Tatarstan. The courtroom was a stark space, its walls lined with wood, its benches filled with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers. Tadjirov stood in a glass cage, a common feature in Russian courts, his face gaunt, his eyes avoiding the crowd. The prosecution laid out the case: 31 murders, 3 attempted murders, 34 assaults, all committed between March 2011 and September 2012 across 15 cities. The victims were named one by one, their lives recounted in painful detail. Zenaida, who loved to knit; Maria, who kept a garden; Anna, who sang in her church choir. The families wept as the evidence was presented. The scarves, the belts, the stolen trinkets that had been their loved ones' treasures. Tajirov's lawyer, Murat Asharov, argued for leniency, claiming his client was a product of circumstance, a man driven by poverty and desperation. But the evidence was overwhelming, and on March 21, 2024, the court delivered its verdict: life in prison. Tajirov showed no emotion as the sentence was read, his face a mask of resignation. The families, though relieved, found little solace. "It won't bring her back," Elena, Zenaida's daughter, told a reporter, her voice steady but her eyes wet with tears. Asharov vowed to appeal, but on December 10, 2024, the Fourth Court of Appeal in Nizhny Novgorod upheld the sentence, sealing Tajirov's fate. For Captain Streltsov, now nearing retirement, the verdict was a bittersweet triumph. He had spent years chasing the Volga maniac, his career defined by the case that had eluded him. He visited the graves of the victims, leaving flowers at each marker, a silent apology for the years they waited for justice. The cities along the Volga, Kazan, Ufa, Samara, began to heal, but the scars remained. The Khrushchevkas, once places of warmth, were now reminders of vulnerability, their doors locked tight against the world. The case of Radik Tajirov, the Volga maniac, was closed, but its echoes lingered, a testament to the lives lost and the resilience of those who fought for truth in their memory. Story 8. In the ancient city of Kyoto, where cherry blossoms painted the spring air and temple bells echoed through narrow streets, the summer of 2019 was warm and vibrant. The city, Japan's cultural heart, thrived on a delicate balance of tradition and modernity, its streets bustling with tourists, students, and artisans. In the Fushimi Ward, a quiet neighborhood of modest homes and small businesses, Kyoto Animation's #1 studio stood as a beacon of creativity. Known as KyoAni, the studio was a beloved institution, crafting anime that captured hearts worldwide with stories of friendship, love, and resilience. Its employees, a tight-knit group of artists and dreamers, worked in a 3-story building filled with sketches, storyboards, and the hum of creative energy. But on July 18, 2019, a man named Shinji Aoba would shatter this sanctuary, unleashing a tragedy that would claim 36 lives, injure dozens, and leave a nation grappling with grief. This is the story of the Kyoto Animation arson case, a tale of delusion, destruction, and the enduring strength of those left to pick up the pieces. Shinji Aoba was a man adrift, a 41-year-old loner, whose life had been a series of false starts and bitter disappointments. Born in 1978 in Saitama Prefecture, north of Tokyo, he grew up in a world that seemed to offer little kindness. His childhood was marked by instability, his parents' divorce, a fractured family, and a sense of being unmoored. As a young man, he dreamed of becoming a novelist, pouring his hopes into stories he believed could change his life. But rejection followed him like a shadow. He drifted from job to job, contract work, menial tasks, never finding a place to belong. His apartments, often cramped and cluttered, were temporary shelters in a life of constant upheaval. Neighbors described him as a troublemaker, quick to argue, his voice sharp with frustration. By 2019, he was unemployed, scraping by on the edges of society, his mind a tangle of resentment and delusion. Aoba's obsession with Kyoto Animation began years earlier, in 2017, when he submitted 2 novels to the studio's annual writing contest, a prestigious competition that offered aspiring writers a chance to see their work adapted into anime. KyoAni was known for its integrity, its judges carefully reviewing each submission, but Aoba's novels didn't make the cut. To him, this was no mere rejection, it was theft. In his mind, a conspiracy took root. Kyoani had stolen his ideas, plagiarized his work, and mocked his dreams. He fixated on this belief, his thoughts spiraling into a dark fantasy where a shadowy figure controlled the studio, orchestrating his failure. The delusion grew, fueled by years of isolation and failure, until it became a compulsion to act, to make Kyoani pay for the slight he imagined. On the morning of July 18, 2019, the air in Kyoto was heavy with summer heat. At Kyoto Animation's #1 studio, about 70 employees were at work, their desks scattered with pencils, monitors, and half-finished drawings. The studio was a hive of activity, its 3 floors alive with the creative pulse of animators, writers, and directors. Naomi Ishida, a 49-year-old artist, was among them, her hands deftly sketching characters for an upcoming project. She had worked at Kyoani for years, her passion for storytelling matched only by her love for her colleagues. The studio was more than a workplace. It was a family, a place where dreams were woven into art. Outside, the streets of Fushimi Ward were quiet, the neighborhood unaware of the storm about to descend. Aoba had spent weeks planning his attack. He studied past arson cases, learning how fire could consume quickly, how gasoline could amplify destruction. In Japan, gasoline sales were tightly regulated, but Aoba was meticulous, purchasing 40 liters in 2 metal cans, claiming it was for a generator. He scouted the studio, noting its single entrance, its spiral staircase, its compact 7,500 square foot structure, a perfect trap. A month earlier, he had plotted a separate attack on a train station in Saitama, but abandoned it, his focus narrowing to Kyoani. On July 16th, a resident in Uji, near Kyoto, spotted him, a lanky figure with a cap pulled low, pacing near the studio. 2 days later, he was ready. At 10:31 a.m., Aoba approached the studio's entrance, his heart pounding, his hands clutching the cans of gasoline. He wore a red t-shirt, his face set with a grim determination. He knocked on the door, and when an employee answered, he pushed inside, splashing gasoline across the floor, the walls, the people nearby. "You die!" he screamed, his voice raw with rage, as he ignited a lighter. The fire erupted instantly, a roaring beast that swallowed the entrance and raced upward. The employees, caught off guard, scrambled for safety, but the single exit was engulfed, the spiral staircase a death trap. Black smoke billowed, and the heat was unbearable, a suffocating force that drove many to the upper floors where they were trapped. Naomi Ishida was on the 2nd floor when the fire began. She heard shouts, smelled the acrid stench of burning fuel, and saw a black cloud rising from below. Her heart raced as she ran toward the staircase, but the flames were too fierce. Colleagues around her panicked, some jumping from windows, others collapsing from smoke inhalation. Naomi, desperate, tried to reach the roof, but the spiral staircase was a funnel of fire and smoke. She fell, overcome by carbon monoxide, her body one of many found later on those stairs, a silent testament to the desperate fight for survival. Outside, a woman watched in horror as an employee leapt from a 2nd-floor window, his body crashing to the ground, the fire too strong to allow rescue. "It was like hell," she told reporters, her voice trembling. The fire department arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the morning air, but the blaze was relentless. Firefighters battled the flames, their hoses arcing water into the inferno, but the studio was a lost cause. The 3-story building, once a haven of creativity, was reduced to a charred skeleton. 36 people died, many from carbon monoxide poisoning, their bodies found huddled together, as if seeking comfort in their final moments. 32 others were injured, some with burns so severe they would carry scars for life. Aoba himself was badly burned, his body covered in flames as he fled the scene. He collapsed nearby, his skin blistered, his consciousness fading. Police arrested him, but he was too injured to be questioned. His body rushed to a hospital where he would spend the next 10 months fighting for his life. The news of the attack spread like wildfire, shocking Japan and the world. Kyoto Animation was a cultural treasure, its works like K-On! And a silent voice beloved for their emotional depth. The loss of 36 lives, artists, writers, dreamers, was a blow to the global anime community. Fans gathered outside the studio, laying flowers and handwritten notes, their tears mixing with the ash that still lingered in the air. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed his condolences, calling the attack gut-wrenching. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi announced tighter restrictions on gasoline sales, a direct response to the tragedy. The nation mourned, but for the families of the victims, the grief was raw and personal. Naomi Ishida's mother, speaking to the Mainichi Shimbun, wept as she said, "I should have told her not to go to work that morning. Even if he gets the death penalty, Naomi won't come back." The investigation was meticulous, led by Detective Hiroshi Tanaka, a veteran of the Kyoto Prefectural Police. Tanaka was in his 50s, his hair graying, his eyes heavy with the weight of cases that had marked his career. The Kyoani attack was different, though, a crime of unprecedented scale, the deadliest mass murder in Japan's post-war history. The National Police Agency confirmed it surpassed even the 2001 Kabukicho fire in Tokyo, which killed 44. Tanaka's team combed through the wreckage, collecting fragments of evidence. The gasoline cans, the lighter, the charred remains of the studio. They interviewed survivors, their voices choked with trauma, and pieced together Aoba's movements. The CCTV footage from Uji, grainy but unmistakable, showed him near the studio days before the attack, his intent clear. Aoba's recovery was slow, his body ravaged by burns covering 90% of his skin. He underwent 12 operations, his survival a testament to the skill of his doctors, though one, reflecting later to the Asahi Shimbun, wondered about the meaning of saving a life that had caused such devastation. Aoba was unconscious for weeks, his condition so critical that police could not arrest him until May 27, 2020, when he was wheeled into the Fushimi police station on a stretcher. His interrogation began only after a psychological evaluation, a process that took months. The question of his mental state loomed large. Aoba claimed he had been consumed by delusions for over a decade, believing KyoAni had plagiarized his work. He spoke of a shadowy figure directing the studio's actions, a fantasy that had driven him to kill. But the prosecution was skeptical, pointing to his meticulous planning, his study of arson cases, his purchase of gasoline, all signs of a man who knew right from wrong. The trial began on September 5, 2023, in the Kyoto District Court, a somber space filled with the weight of loss. The courtroom was packed, family members of the victims sitting in silent rows, their faces etched with pain. Aoba, now 45, appeared in a wheelchair, his body frail but his eyes alert. He faced 5 charges: murder, attempted murder, arson, and related crimes. The prosecution, led by a determined young lawyer named Keiko Yamada, argued that Aoba was fully culpable, his delusions a convenient excuse. They presented evidence of his premeditation: the gasoline cans, the scouted location, the abandoned train station plan. He selected the method of the crime based on his own thoughts and knowledge, Judge Keisuke Masuda said, his voice steady as he rejected claims of insanity or diminished capacity. The defense, led by Murat Asharov, countered that Aoba's mental state was compromised, his actions driven by a decade-long delusion that eroded his ability to control himself. They pleaded for leniency, even acquittal, but their arguments faltered against the weight of the evidence. The trial was a public spectacle, with lines forming for tickets to the hearings. About 80 people, including survivors and victims' families, gave statements, their words a tapestry of grief and resilience. 19 of the 36 victims' names were withheld, a gesture of respect for their families' privacy, but their stories were told. Naomi Ishida, who dreamed of directing her own anime. A young animator who had just joined KyoAni. A writer who left behind a notebook of unfinished stories. One family member, a father whose son died, spoke of Aoba's lack of remorse, his self-centered justifications. But in a later interview with the Asahi Shimbun, he softened, moved by Aoba's claim that he wanted to speak out to prevent future crimes. "There are words only he can express," the father said, his voice heavy with conflicted hope. On January 25th, 2024, the court delivered its verdict. Judge Masuda, his tone grave, sentenced Aoba to death by hanging, a punishment reserved for Japan's most heinous crimes. The courtroom was silent, save for a single sob from a family member. Aoba, his face unreadable, said little, but later told the Asahi Shimbun, "I seriously accept the verdict." He admitted to feeling shock at the sentence, but insisted he wanted to appeal. Not to escape punishment, but to speak more about his crime, to leave lessons for others. The prosecution had sought the death penalty, and the court agreed, citing the indescribable pain inflicted on the victims and their families. The attack, Masuda said, had turned the studio into hell, a phrase that echoed in news reports across Japan. The defense filed an appeal with the Osaka High Court, arguing that the Kyoto court had misjudged Aoba's mental state and questioning the constitutionality of the death penalty. But on January 27, 2025, Aoba overruled his lawyers, withdrawing the appeal himself. The decision stunned the court, finalizing his death sentence. His lawyer, Asherov, attempted to nullify the withdrawal, but as of early 2025, no further action had been taken. Japan's death row, with 107 inmates as of December 2024, operated in secrecy, prisoners informed of their execution only hours before. Aoba's fate was sealed, though the date of his hanging remained unknown, a shadow hanging over his final days. For the survivors and families, the verdict brought little closure. Kyoto Animation released a statement, their words laced with pain. "There is not the slightest change in the chagrin we feel. Our souls feel nothing but pain." The studio, rebuilt in a new location, continued its work, a testament to its resilience. Fans worldwide raised millions to support KyoAni's recovery, their love for the studio undimmed. Detective Tanaka, nearing retirement, visited the site of the old studio, now a vacant lot, and laid a flower where the entrance once stood. He thought of Naomi Ishida, of the 36 lives lost, and of the justice that had come too late to heal. Kyoto, with its temples and rivers, carried on, but the scars of July 18, 2019, remained, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the enduring power of art to mend broken hearts.